Welcome to round number 5 of the Candidates 2024 bot edition. Here, the bots of the real candidates battle it out for the one and only spot against the world champion Dingley Ren next year to play for the world championship. Here, in this round, we have Pragg playing against Nepo. Pragg currently on 1.5 points and Nepo on 2 points. This game is very important for both of them. The one who wins has a shot to catch up the leaders of the pack. So let's see what happens. And Pragg with the white pieces, e4, and we enter another Sicilian. And more specifically, after some moves, we move into a knight off. First knight off of these candidates. Great, I love to see the knight off h3, one of the sidelines. But an interesting move, because there's so many moves you can make in this position, but h3 is definitely one of them. e5, kicking away the knight, often going here, but knight to d2 is also definitely good. And here, the computer likes the move h5, preventing black from expanding anytime soon. And instead, white brings in the bishop to pin the knight to the queen. And yeah, at some point you can exchange it to create a good field for your knight over here. Bishop to d6, protecting also this field in case the knight ever moves in. And after the trade, the knight indeed goes there. Now the best move is to go back with the queen. That's also what was played. For example, if you would take and the queen comes in, you have some pressure on this pawn, but with knight to c7, you basically prevent that. And after, for example, knight to c3 and bishop e7, black has a good position. So instead, queen to d8. The queen goes forward, joining the party. The knight moves here. This is a good field for the knight attacking the pawn and the queen. And castles. Here, Nepo brings in the rook, attacking the c2 square. This is a very common theme. You would like to have your queen at some point also on this file, but of course now the knight protects that square. And the b pawn will start rolling at some point. Knight comes here. And the move g6, making sure that you can develop also the bishop to this side of the board. King goes here already, going away from a potential check over here. Nepo moves his bishop there anyway. g3 and knight to c5. Looks like a great square, attacking the pawn and the queen. And of course white needs to act. Queen to f3 and king to f8. Trying to castle himself by going here at some point. Queen to g2. Already making sure that if the king ever goes here, that you're on the right file. And the king indeed goes here. And now the best move would have been f4 to break open the position. After e takes and g takes, you know, this pawn is being pinned. This pawn is attacked but is also defended by a knight, and takes. Will still make sure that the pawn is being defended. And of course you cannot take this pawn because the queen protects it. Instead, Pragg played a slower move, rook to g1. Setting up the battery, but you need time to open up the position as well, because now the g-pawn is still in front of the queen and the rook. b5, attacking. That's a great square, great move. f4, a bit too late, but still bringing in his pieces. Rook to b8, not the right move. Better would have been to start attacking, chase away this knight. And here, for example, you would take this pawn, but instead this pawn falls, right? So if you take back, you win this pawn, and black is so much better here because this file is now opened up. And although you have a battery here, the king is actually quite safe. But that's not what happened. Rook b8 and a3. That's a good move. Knight to a4, asking questions to the knight. Where are you going? Takes. That's not a good move because you take back. And queen f2. Better here would have been again to start attacking with f5. And if you would take here with check, you take it back, and with enough to b4 here you take the pawn. Here queen b6 is the right move, sacrificing this bishop. Very double-edged. That's not how it went. Instead, Pragg took the knight, takes back, and now this file is completely open. White completely lost his advantage also because of this. Queen to f2, taking the knight, takes back. with the pawn. You should have taken with the rook and play against this pawn, which is weak. Instead, after taking with the pawn, you basically fix black's issues, because now this pawn is harder to attack. So you bring in the queen, bishop takes a6, grabbing the loose pawn, h4. Now white needs to make some decisions. Will you take? Well, then it's harder for you to attack, and this pawn falls as well. Will you move forward? And again, this pawn falls. Instead, Pragg goes to f5. Here, Nepo should have simply taken the pawn. That's not what he did. He took the pawn here. Then after queen, he should have taken this pawn, but okay, this move is still pretty fine. Still make sure that he's in the lead and has a winning position. Queen to c3, setting up on this diagonal and taking this pawn. Bringing in the rook, and here Nepo tries to attack this loose bishop. Instead of moving the bishop, Pragg plays the move rook to f1. What if you take the bishop? Well, then you can simply take this bishop, because this pawn is being pinned. And you attack the queen, you attack this pawn after that, better for white. So, Pragg plays the move queen to f6. Getting rid of this pin. Queen to f6, and this pawn is not being pinned anymore. Bishop moves back, and then the rook goes to c8. Here, the move king a8, getting away from the b file, rook to b7. And there's a crazy tactic in this position, because in the end, the bishop wants to go here and making sure to win an exchange. But at the moment, this bishop is being pinned by the rook on the queen. So what do? You simply take the bishop. Because if you take back, and that's what also Nepo played, you take the queen with check, takes back, and here you win the exchange back. Rook c to c7, you take, and you take. And many people say rook endgames are always a draw, but not in this case, because black is simply better. Why? Because of this pawn. It is so much faster than these pawns, because there are still some black pawns preventing the progress of white's pawns. King goes here. You cannot take this pawn, of course, because it's defended by the rook. You take now this pawn, and now this pawn starts rolling. And this will be the key pawn of Nepo. Rook to the end of the board, and now the pawn starts rolling. And the rook goes behind the pawn. Always when you have a passer, make sure your rook is behind the pawn, exactly like Nepo did. And now he moves in the king. He also could have taken here, but basically there's not a lot to do. Moving forward, check. Now, Pragg made sure that his rook is in front of the pawn, and in a few moves, actually, you win the rook. And they played a bit more moves, but in this position, yeah, these pawns are basically stopped from moving forward, and you can simply take this pawn. And in this position, Pragg resigned. An important win for Nepo. Therefore, we move also to the second game of round number 5. Gukesh bot against Abasov bot. d4, d5. And the same for these two, right? They need to win to make any chance in this candidate. c4, e6, knight c5, knight f6, a classic queen's gambit declined. Knight f3 and takes. And we move into the Vienna variation. In this kind of structure, black takes a pawn here, winning a pawn, but with the move e4, white gets a great center in return. And after the move bishop to b4, you take the pawn, and a pawn sacrifice from white, giving up a pawn in the center, because black can simply take here. But after move castles and knight takes and pawn takes, you see that yes, indeed, white gave up a pawn, but is so much more active. The knight, bishop, this bishop is already on a good diagonal. Perhaps we'll go here at some point, the rook will join the game. And here the best move would have been to simply retreat the bishop. That's not what Abasov did, he took the pawn. But now the rook joins the party, attacking this pawn. And it will take more time to develop this bishop as well. Because of that. While black already has troubles in development. c5, attacking the center. And here bishop to g5, f6, and here Gukesh has a great move in store. Queen to b3, attacking the loose bishop, attacking this pawn as well. Yes, giving up this bishop, but if you would take it here, then you would simply take this bishop. And look at this pawn structure. Horrible. castles would be the right move, and then you simply take the pawn. Not what happened, because Abasov played the move knight to c6. Even worse, because now you can simply take the bishop. And now you have to take this bishop, because otherwise you're losing a piece. And here Abasov has an in-between move to first take the pawn, but then the queen moves here. And now black is simply a bishop down. And if you take here, look at these pieces eyeing the e6 pawn. So Gukesh took the pawn with the bishop, and instead of taking back, because this is a horrible position, check, and queen to e7, and yeah, you go to d5 for example, and the rook will come in, and this is horrible for black. So instead, king to f7, trying to go away from all of that, and rook to b5, great move, attacking this pawn as well, and it's already being attacked by the knight. And the rook can also come to f5, giving a check, right? Queen to e7, rook f5, check, the king cannot go here. And you don't want to put in between the queen, so the king has to go back into the center, out into the open. So you see the big downside of not developing as black in the opening and taking a pawn in the end on c4 in one of the first moves. Knight to g5, not the best move. Better would have been to take the bishop on c8, because if you take back, then here knight to d4 would be a good move, and you cannot really take back because then you put in between the rook and you win the queen. Instead, knight g5, not the best move, but also very strong. But here black has a good move to take the bishop, and when you take back the bishop, well, now with g6 you attack the rook, and the rook has to make a decision, go back to b5, and a6 would kick away the rook, going to d5, and then king to f7. Well, this is still very strong for white, of course, but yeah, black is somewhat holding the rooks, can come back into the game at some point, but very hard to defend still. Instead, Abasov played the move g6, attacking the rook, which is a terrible blunder, because now you take the bishop. Brilliant move. And what if you take the queen? Well, then you simply take it back with a check. And what if you simply take your rook, because your rook is hanging? Well, then you have bishop to b7, attacking the knight and the rook, and you cannot defend both. And this queen is being pinned, right? Remember. So queen to e1, check in between, and now you take finally the queen. And this is a much better position for white. Instead, Abasov went for rook takes, and now rook to f7. Great move. If you take the queen, you take it back. King goes here, and after rook takes b7, for example, let's play a random move, but this is already a checkmate. Abasov played queen to e5, still being protected by the knight. Rook takes, rook f8, and now you take the other pawn. You're simply pawn grabbing. a6 and queen takes e5, and here you pin the knight to the king. You have to defend it with the rook, but now you have a beautiful fork over here, winning the exchange, and also that's also how it went. And finally, after some more moves, Abasov decided it was good enough after rook takes on d4. Important win for Gukesh. Like Nepo, moving back up the standings. But let's see how the leaders did. What did they do? Caruana played with the back pieces against Vidit. Vidit opened strong, lost a few games after that, has to bounce back. Here, d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, c4, attacking the center. And here, e6, e3. So this is a classic Queen's Gambit declined. Moving into the Tarrasch kind of position with the c5 move. Bishop to e2 and bishop to e6, castles, castles. Look at this symmetrical position with the bishops, the knights and the pawns. And often a symmetrical position is a bit better for white because white has the tempo up and can make the first moves. a3, b6, knight c3, knight c6. And here b3. Not the most accurate move, better would have been to play c takes, and after some exchanges, play b3 to prevent the advance of this pawn. Bishop b7, c takes, knight takes, knight takes, queen takes, a lot of exchanges, d takes, pawn takes, you know, a lot of exchanges, and this likely will end into a draw. Too much exchanges to have enough material at some point, probably, to actually make a difference in this game. So that's very well countered by Caruana. Queen takes d5. Better would have been bishop to b2. Again, change on your own terms. But if the rook goes here, for example, play queen to c2 and still make sure to keep some pieces on the board. Vidit traded off the queens, probably because he's playing against Caruana, so he's probably also happy with a draw, although he's with the white pieces, and bishop b2. The knight goes here, you move the pawn forward, and yes, Vidit gave up a pawn here, but the a7 pawn is very weak. And likely you will win it back. And also this pawn is on an island and also very weak. So rook to a4, knight to c6, and the rook goes to d1, attacking this pawn. And you cannot defend everything. Bishop a6, getting rid of a key defender in black's position. Takes. This knight is now vulnerable, has to move, and you go here to a4, attacking the bishop. But now you can simply protect this bishop. But look at these pieces. The knight is underdeveloped on b8 and the rook is still on the starting square. King to f1, bringing in the king. f6, bishop to a3, trying to get rid of this bishop. And then this pawn is definitely super weak. Takes, and knight to c6. Knight to d5, preventing this pawn to progress further. And knight to e5. Knight to e6, attacking this rook. The rook has to make a decision now. Goes to the open file, giving away the pawn. And after the check and king to e2, there's another check, going back. Here, Caruana threatens to give a checkmate on the first row. But here, Vidit has one good move and plays it, rook, check. And now the rook is deflected from going here. Has to take, then you take back. Still, Caruana will win back one of these pawns because he is now attacking two pawns, but instead Vidit will pick up this pawn. So it's in the end a pawn trade. Knight to e6, takes, and taking the other pawn. Check, and now you will protect these pawns. And although this is an island, this should be an easy draw for Vidit. And after a check, going here, h3, rook to e3, Vidit chose to pin the knight to the rook, and also leaving his knight hanging. So takes is a simply trade of rooks. And this is a drawn position. The game went on for a while, but it ended in a draw and Vidit held this position beautifully. Both getting a half a point extra. Vidit needed a half point, and Caruana, of course, was very happy with a draw with the black pieces against a strong player like Vidit. The last game of this round, Firouzja against Nakamura bot. e4, c6, going into some sort of Caro-Kann. And the exchange variation, to be precise. Here queen takes by Nakamura, very unexpected. Better would have been to just take with the pawn. But he brings in the queen and immediately Firouzja attacks the queen. And the queen has to make a choice. Will you go back or will you stay active? And that's also what Nakamura did by going to d6. But here you're also blocking the room for this bishop at some point. Knight to f3, and the bishop goes to f5, bishop e3, and knight to f6, bishop e2. Some more developments happened, and here queen to c1. Question mark. Better would have been, in order to keep the advantage, to go to h4 with the knight, attacking this bishop and winning this bishop, because this bishop cannot go anywhere to not be taken. So, but okay, queen c1, h6. Giving room for the bishop to go backwards in case of knight h4, because then you go here. Also important to remember that h6 is a good move if your bishop is on f5 often, because then you can retreat your bishop. Bishop f4, attacking the queen. Now the queen has to go somewhere, and it goes to e7, and this bishop has still difficulties with developing. h3. And here Nakamura decides to go on the offensive. But it's not a good move. He goes for castles long. Instead, he should have gone g5 and progress with the pawns. He chose to bring in the rooks first by castling long, but this gives an opportunity for white to also start attacking. Retreating the bishop to prevent the tempo win from black with the move g5. It will come sooner or later. Actually, it will come right away. g5, rook to e1. Bring the rook into the game. Better would have been, and this is thematically, h4. Start attacking. And this is what Firouzja forgot multiple times in this game. Rook e1. And also Nakamura brings his rook into the attack. Great move. Bishop d3. Not the best move. Again, a4. I think before I said h4, but this is a4, of course. a4 is the best move. Bishop d3. And here, g4 would have been the best move. Progressing your attack. Not what happened. Instead, queen to b4. a3, kicking away the queen. The queen goes to b6. b4, bishop takes. And taking back. And these pawns are quite passive. These doubled pawns here, not too good. But at the same time, you can move your knights around these pawns. a5. Ooh, that's a bad move. Here, Hikaru should have gone for g4 again. a5. You open up your own position with this move. This rook will come in anyway. Here, b5 would be the best move. And look at this beautiful bishop eyeing on this diagonal. This pawn can take at some point. The rook will come in. Perhaps you will double up also your queen and your rook. But instead, Firouzja went for the move queen c2. Very passive. He should have taken the opportunity to attack. g4. Now Nakamura starts attacking. H takes and rook takes. Well, better would have been to take with the knight. And then, for example, bishop to g3. And now this pawn will likely join the party at some point, or the f-pawn. But after rook takes, rook to c1, and Firouzja is +3 in this position. +3. Will Hikaru manage to hold? Knight to d5 and knight to a4. This is the big blunder of Firouzja. He should have gone b5 once more. Very strong, but he didn't do it and went for the knight here. Logical, because you attack the queen needs to make a choice, but this loses his advantage after queen to b5. Because after you take the pawn, you take the pawn back, and here the rook is very strong, and after the bishop moves at some point, the rook will come in. Black has a very strong attack, so king h1 will be best to be already ahead of all these plans black has, but he goes king to f1, and here Hikaru plays the move queen to a6, pinning this pawn to the king. And perhaps it was a time trouble, but here Firouzja went king to g1, now completely losing his advantage. It was very unclear why he went back with the king. Instead, he should have brought in the rook into the game and attack. But after king g1, now bishop e7 would be very good to bring in the rook and continue your attack. Instead, Nakamura played the move knight to f4, also not the right move. You take back, but here queen b3 is the losing move for Firouzja. He should have played rook to b1 once again, but after queen b3, you bring in the bishop and the rook finally joins the party. But now everything is quite well defended. The queen defends these pawns, also the knight is part of the defense. This bishop is also helping. Rook g8, you can continue your attack. And that's what Nakamura does. Knight to d2, not the best move. Now, because your pawn is pinned, black threatens to take the knight. You should have gone here, but Firouzja played away his knight. And there's not a lot of defenders in white's camp. Only these two pawns, and the rest of the pieces are all on the other side of the board. And here, this pawn is simply hanging. Hikaru takes a pawn and attacks this knight now twice. Firouzja brings in the rook, trades, and now plays the bishop back, protecting this square now another time. And black is simply fine here, and a pawn up. Knight check, you take the knight, and there's a bunch of exchanges. And in many games, rook endings are a draw, but not this one, because you're a pawn up and you have very nice connected pawns over here. And these two pawns are very weak and easy targets. Rook g4. See how Nakamura capitalizes on the weak positions of white. Rook b3, attacking the pawn, so this rook is already tied to the defense of these pawns and cannot move anywhere else, making sure that the black's king can join the party. And that's also what Nakamura does. Look at this super central king. King to a3. Okay, now you start attacking these weaknesses in black's camp. f4 brings forward the other pawn. King to d2, e5. Making sure that white needs to make choices. Will you take? Yes, takes. And now there's another weakness. 3 weak pawns in white's position against 2 pawn islands for black. And a pawn more. This is surely winning. King to e3. And now attacking this pawn. See how he attacks on both sides of the board continuously. Very strong. King has to defend. Now rook to g6. Rook here. Now you bring the king forward. Now the king eyes on a pawn. This rook eyes on a pawn. This is surely winning. Going back. And here moving forward this pawn. What a demonstration of how to win such positions. Rook b1, rook g8 attacking this pawn now. If you take here, then you take here. And this pawn will simply promote at some point. Instead, Firouzja played rook to g1, rook g4. You played a4, you can simply take it, and now you have a passer. At some point this rook needs to take it, then you can take this pawn, and then this pawn is going to promote, and you will for sure make sure that one of these pawns will also become a passer. Rook here, king comes in, and in this position Firouzja resigned. Important win for Nakamura, moving up the standings. And that brings us to the standings after round 5. What a super tense tournament. Caruana leading with 3.5 points, just half a point ahead of 4 players. Firouzja, Nakamura, Gukesh and Nepo. Then we have Vidit, and then last Pragg, and on 1 point Abasov. Stay tuned for round 6